6 years ago, the world locked down. 128 million households in the United States, 128 million different pandemics. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think it's time that we all talked about it because I'm not sure any of us have fully processed what happened. I know I haven't. Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm Rob Volpe, the empathy activist, author of Tell Me More About That. And this is the newsletter and video series where we explore human insights and empathy, what it is, how it works, and how to use it to live and work better. This month marks 6 years since the world locked down. And in this episode, I wanted to just do something a little different. It's not a how-to, it's not a framework breakdown, it's just an honest reflection on what we've been through and an invitation to sit with some of it together. So let's get into it. Imagine that, 128 million households. And I actually wrote about this in my book when I asked readers at the start of chapter 15 to visualize their own homes, and then the homes of the people that they love, maybe their friends or their family, and then to keep zooming it out so that they're looking at their neighborhood, their town, their city, their state, their country. And I wrote, imagine that, 128 million. Take that in for a moment. And now let your mind drift down your own block. Elevate your perspective so you can have a bird's eye view of your neighborhood, your town, or city. Now, soar high and see the broad swath of houses across America. Each and every one of them is nuanced and slightly different from the other. And that was 128 million. That was the 2020 census count. Today, there are nearly 134 million households. We kept growing, even when everything felt like it was contracting around us. So just think about one neighborhood, maybe your neighborhood. Dozens of houses, dozens of different pandemics happening simultaneously, side by side, behind closed doors. And even within the same household, the people living there were experiencing it differently. Is it any wonder that we fragmented as a society over the pandemic? So for myself, because your pandemic may not be my pandemic, and March of 2020 brought life as many people knew it to a halt. Commutes disappeared, calendars emptied out, people baked a lot of bread, they took a lot of long walks, people sat with themselves in ways that they hadn't in years. Now, that might have been some people's pandemic, but that was not my actual pandemic, because at the time I was leading Ignite 360, the qualitative research firm that I founded, and our work did not stop, especially as the CEO. It went into overdrive. I was on Zoom calls from 8 in the morning until 6 at night, just figuring out how to keep the company alive, looking into the government subsidy, was a PPO, looking at clients and what work to do. How do we do deep empathy building research from a remote desk without losing the quality that we were known for? And I was getting about 1,500 steps a day, which tells you everything about the size of my world at that point. But at the same time as the pandemic was started, I launched a longitudinal research study, Navigating to a New Normal, where I and my team, we conducted ongoing interviews with everyday Americans throughout the pandemic and beyond. And it was intended to look at the pandemic and how people were coping and changing and adapting. But then so many other things kept happening and changing in America. And so now, 6 years in, that study is still running. Those weekly interviews kept me sane. They gave me perspective on what was happening across the country and how other people were reacting and handling it, because I was so busy trying to survive my own version of it that I wasn't fully processing what was actually happening to me. Because it was so busy, I never felt like I got that chance to pause. I didn't get to bake the sourdough bread. And I'm not complaining about it, but that was what my experience was. And lately, I've been sitting with the idea that my pandemic, the grief, the exhaustion, the processing is still incomplete, that it's still a work in progress. And maybe yours is too. And that's why I wanted to bring attention to this. You see, the word that keeps coming to me 6 years on is uncertainty. And it's not just the uncertainty of those early weeks and months, the questions about the virus. Is it airborne? How long will it last on surfaces? Do I need to wash my groceries? What does define close contact? But an actual deeper, sort of lasting uncertainty that settled into our nervous systems and I don't think has fully left. Because life upended in an instant. And then it just kept upending. Rules kept changing. Guidance contradicted itself. Neighbors who were careful, neighbors who weren't. The familiar became very foreign, and people we thought we knew surprised us. And that contributes to this uncertainty, and it's layered on top of a political era of chaos that didn't end when the restrictions did. I came across a line recently that stopped me. It's from UC Berkeley's Greater Good. And it said this: the opposite of uncertainty isn't certainty, it's presence. And I've been thinking about that a lot and how I'm showing up and how I'm being present and how I'm being present for what transpired. Unfortunately, there is a lot of loss woven into this 6th anniversary, and it deserves to be named. Some of us lost people that we knew, whether they were family, whether they were friends, neighbors, whether we saw their stories in the news. 1.24 million people in the United States have died from COVID-19. And that number is woven into this in so many ways that it doesn't require elaboration. But there's another kind of loss that's harder to articulate, and it's the loss of a version of ourselves, of a past life that existed before March 2020, of agency, of a way of moving through the world that we didn't know that we'd miss until it was gone. We lost the assumption of continuity, that quiet confidence that next month would more or less resemble this month, that plans could be made and kept, that we were in control. And some of us have made peace with not getting that back. Others are still waiting for that feeling to return, and still others may not yet realize that it was gone in the first place. I'm probably somewhere in the middle, and that depends on the day and my mood, and I'm actually learning that that might be okay, that we need to move on, that we need to heal and to move on. So this month, I actually began transitioning away from moderating on the Navigating to a New Normal project. I've had 6 years of conversations with everyday Americans about how they were coping. 6 years of sitting with their stories, their fears, their resilience. It was my lifeline during the pandemic, and it was a way of making sense of something enormous by listening to people living through it alongside me. I held on to it fiercely, more fiercely than was always rational. When my leadership team suggested that we pull back, I'd get emotional about it because I wasn't just protecting a research program. I was protecting something that had protected me. And now, as part of the transition to Dig Insights, which, as you know, acquired Ignite 360 in 2024, I'm now letting it go, turning it over to a new generation of moderators. And there's a lot of complicated feelings. There's a lot of gratitude that the program is still running, that the participants are still as engaged and as enthusiastic to speak with us as they were in the beginning. And also with the recognition that transitions require release. So this, for me, is like a second ending of the pandemic, and I'm still figuring my way through it and how to actually honor it. It's also worth noting that this particular episode lands right near the spring equinox, that first day of spring. It's the start of Aries season. For those of you who track these things, darkness and light are equal, and from here, light grows. And the pandemic didn't end cleanly for us, and our healing isn't going to either. But as we are turning into this season of light, I believe that that counts for something. And now I want to tell you about a bottle of Guinness. I made Nigella Lawson's chocolate Guinness cake for the first time in February of last year in 2025. It was amazing. Dense, moist, intensely chocolatey. If you watched me taste that brownie a couple of episodes ago, you know how much I love this stuff. And it had this really rich depth from the stout. And there's this cream cheese frosting that Nigella designed, and in the photography and the cookbook where she first published it, and on her website, yes, the link is in the show notes, she designed it to look kind of like the pale head on a freshly poured pint of Guinness. So I loved that cake so much last year. I wanted to make it again, like almost immediately. And then, as you know, I broke my kneecap. My niece was visiting. She came out to help with the recovery. And so we bought some Guinness to do a second bake and make that cake again. But I really found in the aftermath of the injury and the medications and the surgery, I could not muster the energy to stand in the kitchen, let alone sit to coach her through it. So that Guinness ended up living downstairs for the past year waiting. And then finally last week with St. Patrick's Day coming up, I had a reason to make the cake again. You see, my yoga instructor, Katie, had come over and Charles and I sat together after yoga and we each had a slice of the cake. And I baked for Katie before. She generally loves my baking. And there were a lot of, oh my God, that's good reactions. And there might have even been a second slice for some of us because it's that good. And baking is one of those really, truly great pleasures in my life, not just the outcome, even though the outcome was extraordinary in this case, but also the process. I find that when I bake, my brain is settling into this kind of focused presence. Thoughts can float through, but I'm not actively solving anything. I'm just making a cake. And researchers, they would actually call that the flow state, where the part of the brain that might ruminate over something can actually quiet down. Now, I may not have gotten to bake sourdough in 2020 like everybody else. I did make some bread a few years later, but I knew that I was missing something from that time. And so it's been important to me to capture opportunities to bake, to do things, to come together and to connect. And so that cake on St. Patrick's Day, it wasn't about catching up. It was about presence. It was about that Guinness that waited. It was about the friend who came over and that pleasure of making something really beautiful with your hands and sharing it with people that you love. My pandemic may not be completely over in a psychological sense, but a bottle of Guinness, some sugar, flour, chocolate, and a warm oven, that's a pretty good place to start. In the full issue of the newsletter, again, linked below and in the description, I've got 6 reflection questions to help you sit with your own pandemic experience. They're things like, what word would you use to describe what you're still carrying? What did you lose during the pandemic that you haven't fully grieved? And what changed that you're glad has actually stuck with you? And then the 6th question, what is one small thing entirely within your control that you could do this week that feels like an act of presence rather than catching up on a to-do list? And then go do that thing this week. You see, uncertainty thrives in this abstract, and one of the most reliable ways to quiet it, even briefly, is to do something tangible, something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Bake something, plant something, call somebody that you've been meaning to call. The right moment is now. The nervous system actually responds to completion, so give it one this week. All right, that's what I've got for you this episode. 6 years in, still processing, still showing up, still finding presence where I can, even if it takes a bottle of Guinness, some chocolate, and a warm oven to get there. And if you're not already subscribed, please do. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. New issues of Reading Between the Lines drops every 2 weeks, and there is always something worth sitting with. Until next time, stay curious, ask good questions, and let empathy follow.